right. Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you in beautiful Banff. Et pour mes amis québécois, je vous remercie pour me donner l'occasion d'être avec vous dans la ville de Banff. However, because they only gave me 30 minutes, I cannot auto-translate both of them. So I'll just stick with English for now. And kudos to you. I mean, it's a gorgeous day outside. There's some exciting things happening around town, and you chose to sit through two economists presenting, which in and of itself speaks to your commitment to your profession. I think you should receive continuing education credit for this. So let me talk a little bit about what's happening in the United States in 2019. Let me start by saying that in the US in 2019, we are typing, talking, texting on $1,000 apples. At the same time, we like to hop on very jumpy electric bikes and get from here to there. Furthermore, if those don't work, we can always scoot around on birds, limes, and at least until they run out of juice or they give you the bird because they're out of electricity. And of course, we can, Lyft and Uber from here to there. And don't forget, as of this year, we can finally print 3D with metal, and concrete, of course, is old news because we already did that last year. Interesting research coming out of biomedical sciences. Scientists have finally produced the first synthetic embryo. That's pretty outstanding, using nothing but stem cells. For some people, that's an area of concern. I think there's a lot to be talked about in this area. And of course, we are nowadays ordering food, via our fridge, because they're all smart and connected. And we're staying very cozy, with nests, because we can no longer stay cozy in the nest. We need nests to keep us cozy in it. And of course, we use artificial intelligence and genomics to deliver fairly personalized medicine to us. So, at the border of all this innovation and technology in America in 2019, what else do? We build a wall. Yes, we're you know that, right? Half of our government is sent on vacation, right? So I come from Washington, where the workforce is still very much dominated by government agencies, so I have friends who literally have had to put their expenses on credit cards. Anyway, however, I will point out that there is historical precedent for this. There was another great nation that had the same idea many years ago to keep out the hordes, from invading, and they built this gorgeous structure that can be seen from the moon. So I realized there's precedent, and perhaps because we have a real estate developer in chief running the country, that he has his eye upon something else. This wall, while it didn't keep out the hordes of Mongols and the other invaders, it did do one thing for China. It brought in the tourists. So maybe 1,000 years from now, along the southern US border, we'll have a lot of tourists flocking to see this beautiful, huge wall. So anyway, with that in mind, what I'm going to talk about, economically speaking, are some of the factors that are driving US economy today, and all of them really center on change. And not only change, because obviously, as you know, change is the only constant. There's an old saying that goes by that. But the fact that some of these changes are accelerating and are leaving a deep imprint on both the economy as well as the housing market. So I'll start first by saying that the US population over the last decade has continued to grow. Not at the same rate it did several decades ago. But when you look globally at economies, an economy that is not growing, or a country whose population is not growing, will have a very hard time experiencing economic growth. And you look at the economies of some of the European countries, which are struggling with population growth. You look at Japan as a case example in Asia. So the fact the US economy is still growing has been driving even the growth we've had in the last decade. And just as importantly, if you read headlines over the last decade or two in the US, the media has been bemoaning the fact that Americans are getting older. Well, aren't we all getting older in a sense, right? But the big headlines were the graying of America. Woe is us. Well, in 2019, in fact, and now, mind you, this is actually at least a year old data, so I shouldn't say 2019. But when you look at the age breakdown or the demographic breakdown of the population, over 60% of US population is under the age of 50. That's tremendous. When you look at the chart on your right, you will notice that the orange bars are basically Gen X, Gen Y, the millennials, and Gen Z, those that are even younger than millennials. And that has tremendous opportunity for the US economy going forward, and just as much for US real estate. Now, I won't even get into all the details, and in fact, the positive potential. You've heard about the millennials. I'm sure you have millennials too in Canada, right? They were not going to own anything. They were going to rent everything, from renting the runway to renting their apartment to renting the wheels and the bikes and whatever they're doing. Well, in the US today, the largest cohort of buyers in the market are millennials. Oh, and you remember they were only going to live downtown in a 300 square foot studio, right? With a pool and a brewery and a guitar studio in the basement. Anyway, guess where they're buying most of them? In the suburbs. Why? Because they've gotten older, they're having kids, and what's on the list for every new parent? At least in DC, literally, I'm not kidding you, they have waiting lists that run about 7 years. 7 years for some of these preschools and schools. Why? Schools are important. So where are the good schools? In the suburbs. Anyway, moving on. U.S. economy is coming on a debatable, as Gregory pointed out, according to some economists, but it's coming on a major milestone, that of 10-year economic expansion, which would be the longest on record. It is going back to at least 1850. Economists generally tend to be dismal people, so to get some economists excited means something big is going on. So where are we going? Well, we're going to where no economy has gone before, but not quite. Building on the fact that the Federal Reserve, central bank in the United States, has resorted over 8 years to an unprecedented monetary policy, namely keeping interest rates practically at zero, giving away money for free, right? Money for nothing. Remember, anyone?
Checks for free.
Very good. Because of that, because there's so much, their point was to one, stabilize the financial system, but two, get a lot of money through the banking system into the economy. And how you do that? Through loans, so through business loans, consumer loans, and so on. The economy has had basically a very strong appreciation, and then this last year, the U.S. administration threw fuel on that fire by enacting the tax reform, lowering corporate tax rates. So that actually boosted 2018 numbers quite well. The first 3 quarters, we don't know what happened in the fourth quarter yet because, the government is on vacation. But that being said, the first 3 quarters were basically the strongest growth of the last decade. So that's really good news. That's also shown up in corporate profits. When you look at the chart on your left, you'll see corporate profits are in fact close to record highs in aggregate for the United States. Financial markets, stock markets, have an incredible trajectory, at least until about October. And for the record, I would say 95% of most market crashes in the United States happen roughly around October. So if you're in the market in September, any given year, you should keep an eye out, or at least pull your money. I'm not a financial advisor, don't do what I say. So the markets have had a very jittery last few months, but that notwithstanding, we had solid growth. So businesses in turn have actually made investments. What I will point out, in business chieftains in the US have been, however, very cautious. And when I say that, what I do look at is on your right, you'll notice corporate cash on balance sheets is still near record high. We're looking at about $2 trillion in cash. Now, why would a company keep that much cash on hand? Normally they wouldn't, right? They would reinvest in employment, in R&D, in intellectual property, whatever it is, they would put money to better use. The fact that corporations are still holding this much money on their balance sheets in the United States tells me that CEOs are still not fully convinced about the outlook. And to Gregory's point, I think the outlook is even murkier and less certain going forward. So that tells me that a lot of people are still very nervous. In fact, almost 10 years since the last recession, a lot of people are still looking over their shoulders, wondering, has the economy really recovered? However, one thing that they have finally done is basically push employment numbers positively. Over the last roughly decade, we've added about 21 million new jobs, and just as importantly for the US, most of those jobs have been fairly well spread across various industries, from professional business services, hospitality, education, Even construction has seen growth in employment, which obviously brought unemployment down. In 2018, wage growth finally reached an encouraging level, right? That was the one area where we were waiting to see more growth. We're approaching now 3% year-over-year growth in wages on inflation-adjusted basis. So the good news with that, I'll jump straight to it. The upside is household wealth is at record highs. On your left, you'll see household wealth tied to financial assets, stock investments, 401ks, 403bs. On the right side, you'll see household wealth tied to real estate, equity in a home. By both measures, Americans are doing very well. Even with obviously the dent from the recession, the recovery has paid people very well for sticking in there. What's the downside to the upside? Well, that wealth has gone to people who participated or were active in the markets, whether financial or real estate. If you're not a homeowner, if you don't have investments in the stock market, what do you generally depend on? You depend on income or credit. And when you look at income, 2018 notwithstanding, we saw some final acceleration. Look at income. This is a chart on your left from 1960 until 2018. You see the trend line there. It's not particularly encouraging. So for people, especially young people, coming out of school into the US economy, their incomes are not really at the same level they were for generations prior to that. And just as importantly, on the left chart, what I have is debt by various institutions. So it's a spaghetti chart that only economists would love. What I want you to focus on is the red line. And so I put it in red, by the way. Red line is debt held by the federal government. Sallie Mae, mostly student loans. And you will notice in 2000, the aggregate level of student debt in the United States was roughly $90 billion. As of October of 2018, that debt level exceeded $1 trillion. And I know I live in Washington, where $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, nobody knows where it went. But $1.2 trillion in student debt is going to have a massive mark on the economy, a massive mark on housing markets. Think about the fact that for a lot of students coming out of school, their student debt load exceeds six figures. They'll have $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in debt. So when you come and ask them, hey, you just got a job, why don't you go buy a house? They'll basically tell you, I already have a mortgage. I don't really need another one. Right now, nor can I afford it. So on that, we ran a survey at NAR of student debt directly to consumers. We found out that close to 1 in 5 American consumers have student debt that exceeds $100,000, which is significant. And the report that we put together also asked them about their default rates, and pretty much across the board, the default rate is between 25 and 30% for these folks. Part of that is obviously salaries and sort of the slow economic growth we've had. The other thing is student debt in the United States cannot be discharged like other consumer debt through bankruptcy. So for a lot of these people, it'll take about 25 years to get rid of this debt if they only make minimum payments. And at the end of those 25 years, whatever you get to write off, it's forgiven. The Internal Revenue Service comes after you and says, you just had income this year of whatever you wrote off. You owe us taxes. Incidentally, as an anecdote, there's a dentist that the Wall Street Journal featured this last year, a dentist in the United States who has over $1 million in student debt. He basically, and they described his case wonderfully. He went to the best dental school, incurred all this debt, is slowly repaying it, but he said, there's no way I'm going to repay this before the 25-year mark. So the 26th year, he will owe the IRS taxes on $700,000 of forgiven debt. So the Wall Street Journal was hoping that he was going to be prepared for that. The other thing, speaking of changes, with population growth, normally what you see is obviously increase in housing stock. And you look at household formation as sort of the main driver of demand for housing. Generally in the US, that number has been about 1.3, 1.5 million a year, fairly steady. Household formation dropped understandably during and after the recession, partly because people couldn't afford to move out on their own, so they moved in back with dad, with mom, They got not only one roommate, but they got 2, 3, or 4 of them. So that number has rebounded, but what hasn't rebounded has been housing inventory. A lot of new construction has been lagging. So by some estimates, and Econ Northwest did a calculation, between 2000 and 2015, they basically calculated that there were about 7.3 million household units undersupplied. I would say that we looked at NAR recently this last year, we're probably close to 7.5 million undersupply. So what does that mean for the market? Not a surprise to you because you're in this every day. We've had an extreme shortage of housing. So month supply, which normally runs in a normal market 5 to 6 months, is down to 3.9. Actually, it was down to 3.7. It's been rebounding lately. And affordability has been on a steep decline. In fact, affordability right now is about the same it was in 2008. And we're obviously in a very different market. Not surprisingly, these affordability challenges have been taking a bite out of sales. So sales in 2018 for the whole year were down. Prices were basically up, but price growth is moderating while sales, we just released the December figures this week, and December figures at an annual pace were below 5 million. They dropped by double digits year over year. And so it tells us that the market is actually slowing down from the lack of supply. And when you look more importantly at what does this mean, really, we compute along with Realtor.com an affordability score and a curve, which I'll share with you briefly. When you look at which parts of the United States are more or less affordable, you can tell in blue I have all the unaffordable markets. You can tell the coasts are clearly unaffordable. If you're looking for an affordable place to buy a house, the Midwest is pretty much where you're going to find affordable housing. And what does that mean for a typical family? Because affordability here, affordability there, it's a little vague, right? So we put together this affordability score, which looks at inventory currently on the market on Realtor.com, or in your case would be Realtor.ca, and looks at the median household income and says, based on your income, how much of the current housing inventory can you afford, assuming you're interested in it. And I have here Los Angeles on your left and Dayton, Ohio on your right, mostly because one, the Los Angeles market is the least affordable in the United States. Dayton is one of the most affordable. So if you're making $100,000, which for the record, the median income in the United States is about $57,000 and the average is about $70,000. So at $100,000, you're doing all right. In Los Angeles, at $100,000, you can afford less than 14% of the homes currently listed on the market. And if you make a little bit below the median household income, you can't really afford anything. At $50,000, forget about buying anything. In Dayton, Ohio, by comparison, $100,000, you can afford 88% of the homes currently listed on the market. A much different picture. So when you think of consumers, since they drive 70% of the United States economy, you think of consumers and you think of the market and forward-looking, outlook. You got to keep in mind the fact that with home prices being what they are, not surprising that the market is performing how it is. Interestingly enough, we do run another survey of consumers where we've asked them for about 2 years now about their interest in purchasing homes, right? Because millennials weren't supposed to want to buy homes. They do. So we asked people, are you interested in still purchasing a home? And we asked homeowners if they're going to upgrade, and non-homeowners as well. Overwhelmingly, close to over 80%, and this is as of the fourth quarter of 2018, over 80% of non-owners say they're still interested in purchasing a home, which is tremendous considering, again, all the headwinds that have happened in the U.S. economy over the past decade. Obviously, it's beyond just economics, it's cultural, but I think it spells good news going forward for the housing industry, but also the economy, since housing drives so much of economic growth. And when we asked them, of course, in the same survey, why is it that you don't currently own, the biggest proportion of them say they can't afford to buy. Again, not surprising. So I'll simply want to focus briefly on sort of the global impact, because U.S. is obviously a major market for foreign investors, and every year we've run for quite a while now a survey of buyers of U.S. real estate. And 2018, as you can tell on the chart on your left, marked a slight departure from the years before, in that global sales declined slightly. I will point out that compared to obviously 2011 when we had data, sales are still 80% higher than they were. The big impact I think came from Chinese buyers, obviously, who slowed down. Interestingly enough, for most foreign buyers, and the reason a lot of realtors who work with foreign clients enjoy working with them, they tend to buy more expensive homes in the markets they do. And of course, the reasons they buy it varies. Everything from a residence to rental property to vacation home, whatever it is. And I'll point out that Canadian investors this past year have actually moderated their acquisitions. They used to be number one. Chinese investors obviously took over about 3 years ago. But Canadian buyers still make the second largest group, again, not news to you, the second largest group of investors. But with steep rising prices, not surprisingly for Canadian buyers, that has obviously presented some challenges, especially when you consider, and I have on your right a chart that points out at the financing of purchases, and you can tell Canadian buyers tend to buy mostly with cash. So if you're coming in with a cash purchase, and prices for the record, the past 5 years have appreciated over 40% in the United States, you're obviously going to have a much lower purchasing power, which obviously has impacted the foreign buyers as well. So in terms of the outlook for the next 2 years, although I wouldn't realistically look anything beyond 12 months, partly because it's for the economist in the room, your likelihood of getting your distribution right going forward, it diminishes the farther away you go. But our expectation, at least at NAR, is for economic growth to moderate this year in the United States, in part because, as Gregory pointed out, the Fed's move to increase interest rates, in essence, has not only spooked investors, but has elevated the cost of borrowing money. So for a lot of buyers, obviously that translated, as you noticed, in U.S. mortgage rates when ticked up. They came down a little bit in November, December, but they started elevating. And the truth is, I think we have two issues. One, there's obviously the mechanics of interest rate slows down the flow of money, but two, we have psychology. When you've had over a decade, well, almost a decade of cheap money, it's very hard to convince people that a 5% mortgage is still acceptable by historical standards. It's not that bad. It used to be 18. I know, I'm not even that old. But the point is, even at 5%, it's not bad. But for someone who secured a mortgage and currently sitting on a mortgage at 3.5%, asking them to pay 10, 12, 15% more for their move-up home, plus higher cost of borrowing money, is obviously going to make it a very challenging proposition going forward. But we expect employment to also rise, and most of the other major indicators, aside from obviously mortgage rates, which we also expect to pick up. For the housing overall market, we expect that to actually flatten out a bit and level out going forward. But before I leave you, I wanted to at least put up there, going back to 1948, right? And quoting Chairman Volcker, Federal Reserve former chairman, which you can read, right? The United States, every 10 years, we have the biggest crisis in 50 years. So recognize the fact that we are truly going on 10 years, we're approaching 10 years. So to Gregory's point, if we hit a recession in 2019, I wouldn't be surprised. If you don't hit one in 2019, but we hit it again, you want to be open-eyed about these things, and for many of you who've been in the markets long enough, you know that there's a cyclicality to the economy as well as real estate markets. So we're likely to encounter another downturn. Will it be the same as it was in 2008? Not likely. No two recessions are really the same. So the drivers of this next one are going to be probably a little bit different. The manifestation of a recession is going to look a little bit different. So even for real estate in the housing market, this next recession might not look anything like the last one. And for my last slide, for any of you who are interested in more information about the U.S. economy, U.S. real estate market, the NAR research website has more data, charts, and reports than you care to use when you try to fall asleep at night, if you're sleepless. So with that, I thank you so much, and I look forward to joining Gregory for a Q&A session.
Thank you.